Ogeron was here at 7:30, and he confirmed that Neil Farrell Jr. was returning to the squad. He did make comments yesterday during his media availability with the rest of the media at noon yesterday about the status of Tyler Shelvin. And Shelvin, the big defensive tackle from down in Lafayette, opted out as well. He opted out right around the same time that Jamar Chase did. There are some rumblings and rumors that he may want back in. Here was Ogeron commenting on that.
You know, we hear rumblings. His family has called me, and I know people are talking to him. I have not spoken to Tyler. I think some of his teammates are talking to him, but there's not been a decision yet. He hadn't. The only time to make a decision is to call me, and we take him back, obviously, and we want him back. I don't know where he's at in his mind. If he doesn't want to come back, obviously, we wish him the best. If he wants to come back, like any member of our family, we'll take him back.
So that was Ogeron yesterday commenting on Tyler Shelvin, and as you heard there, Shelvin and LSU, there has been some rumors that he's wanted back in, but as the head coach has said, he's not talked to Tyler specifically. He has talked to the family, but has not made any communication with Tyler Shelvin. What do you think the status is here?
So I think there's a few different things to explore here. I think, like, first is, what does the return of Neil Farrell alone do? Did you realize the numbers that he had put up last year? I did not realize that until this story. I mean, Neil Farrell kind of feels like the ultimate under the radar. He has a bit of Lyman's disease going on where he's playing well, he's doing his job, doing it consistently, and for whatever reason, he just kind of gets lost in the shuffle. I mean, you're talking about the guy who led the team in tackles last year. He led the team in TFLs with 7. I think he had 7. He led the team in run stuffs.
So he led the team, or he led the defensive line?
Excuse me.
Okay.
Led the defense.
I got confused on that too.
No, he obviously didn't lead the team. Excuse me. But he had like 40-plus tackles.
Of the front 4.
To lead the D-line, yeah. He had 7 TFLs, which led the D-line. He had 12 run stuffs, which led the defensive line. So you're talking about your most productive member statistically returning to a D-line that all of a sudden looked very thin. So the impact that Farrell alone has is hard to overstate. I think it's really big. I talked about it yesterday, but there's a tipping point where the whole becomes greater than the sum of its parts, and the return of one player can have more impact than just his play, because now this allows Roy and Guillory, a little more time to continue to develop. They're not as close to seeing the field. You got to love a 3-tech rotation between him and Glenn Logan. That makes both of them better by extension, as they're going to keep each other fresher going in later to the game. Both those guys are starters in my mind, the same way that you essentially had 6 starting linemen for those 3 positions last year. That's how the rotation will work. So Farrell's return alone is huge. If you did get Shelvin back, I think you're talking about maybe, because at that point then you have a full 2 deep that you feel great about before you ever hit the freshmen that you like their potential. If Shelvin returns, I think you're talking about one of the premier defensive lines in the entire SEC. I guess the question is, it sounds like the coaching staff obviously would want Shelvin back. I wonder, though, if you were on that team, how would you feel about Tyler Shelvin returning at this point?
Well, I mean, I can only speak from an outside looking in status, and, I would look at his production level. I wouldn't know the effect to the locker room, and I think that the way that Neil Farrell handled his opt-out was probably as by the book as it could have gone here in this 2020 college football season, where you look at the scenario, you look at the outside circumstances, like a sick grandmother at home that may be a threat to her, and you make a decision.
Well, let's talk about that, because that's why Farrell did, right? So why do you think Tyler Shelvin did? Because the accepted idea that I keep hearing float is that he just didn't want to go through camp.
Honestly, why I don't think Tyler Shelvin is at LSU anymore, and this is a tough answer to put on public radio, is that he's lazy. I think that he saw that was a true option, and that Jamar Chase had made that choice, and that he needed one before him to maybe do it and see that was a real opportunity and chance for him to take. And he made it to get out of work, to get out of going through the day-to-day grind of being a football player that nearly every single day he was in Baton Rouge, he had to get motivated.
Yeah.
Right? There was somebody around him that was motivating him to either work, lose weight, push away from the table, show up to class, show up to the facility, get to practice, all of that stuff. Tyler Shelvin had to have somebody right on his hip reminding him and motivating him that he needed to be there. Now, when he was right, there was a 7-game stretch last year where he was underweight, he was on time, and he was responsible, and he was probably the best interior defensive lineman in college football. When he's right, he's a first-round pick. And I think that was the sentiment around Shelvin this offseason and this year. Like, hey, man, you don't have the luxury that Jamar Chase has. Right? You don't
Jamar
have
Chase
the film out there.
In his, like, it made sense for Jamar Chase to
absolutely,
opt
it makes
out.
sense.
It didn't make sense for Tyler Shelvin to opt out.
There's nothing more that Chase can prove at the college football level to show you that he's an NFL caliber talent.
Yeah,
what else do you need to see?
Look at the bodies that he caught last
absolutely.
year.
I mean, everybody that you put in front of him, he abused. Tyler Shelvin, the feedback from NFL scouts, decision makers, even people around him in the college football level is that you got to do it for another year, man. You got to show these people that you're responsible enough to maintain, once they give you the cash, that you don't eat yourself out of the league.
Well, the biggest breaking point, the biggest difference between college and professional is the kind of support staff. And when you are professional, it is your job. You are expected to behave as such. There are no class checkers. There are no people calling you to ask you where you're at for workouts or anything like that. So just from an NFL scout's perspective, everything they would hear about him would be a massive red flag, which is why he needed this season to try to prove them wrong.
Sure.
And if you're out there and you're in Shelvin's camp and you're listening to this and you're upset, good. You should be. Use it as motivation, right? If you want to prove us wrong, if you want to make us look like idiots, then the path is clear. It is to fight back against everything that we just laid out. Whether Tyler Shelvin returns to LSU or not, he still has the ability to help himself out if he can get in shape, if he can show up. Like if he opts out and goes the NFL route, show up to the combine in great shape, underweight, running well. Like the path, everything he wants, the opportunity is right there in front of him. He just has to go do it. As far as being a teammate, I would be upset, but ultimately I want to win games. And I got to imagine the coaching staff would maybe bring the leadership council side and be like, look, I know this isn't ideal, but he helps us win games. So you got to kind of convince the guys to let him back. But the teammates know why he opted out. And it is a little frustrating when you've sat there and gone through this extended camp period, the super long grind, and this other guy who basically skipped out on it gets to show up and come back. I mean, it's going to be an uphill battle, but I think they could take him back eventually.
Tyler Shelvin, yesterday, Coach Orgeron was commenting on the status of Shelvin and said that he had spoken to the family, had not spoken to Tyler, and that they would take him back, but there was nothing to report on as far as any solid evidence or any solid news was talking about there. We will revisit this conversation. We got much more sound from Ed Orgeron to get to after his media availability yesterday morning here on Off the Bench, and then he met with the media on a Zoom call yesterday morning as well. We will replay some of that sound for you before we get out of here at 10 a.m. Next, we'll talk more college football and NFL with Booger McFarland here on Off the Bench.